All right, and we'll just wait a few seconds for the stream to catch up. Sometimes you hit the play button and it just takes a couple minutes. But anyway, my name is Bill Hurt. I want to welcome everybody to the Portland PowerShell user group. Thanks for coming and thanks for viewing online. Before we get started, I just want to thank our sponsors, as usual, Viewpoint Software for providing the facilities, and to Sapien Software for providing the food. So today we have a remote presenter. We have Mr. Tyler Leonhardt. He's a software developer on the PowerShell team. And he's going to talk to us about AutoRest. AutoRest is a really exciting way to wrap APIs with PowerShell. And if you're not excited about it, you should be. And I think in the next few minutes, if you haven't heard about it yet, you probably will be. So I'll let Tyler handle the rest of his bio, and then we'll get right into the presentation. Thanks.
I hope you can see me and my slides. I can't see you right now because I'm presenting in PowerPoint. But does everything look good? Sorry. Okay, got it. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started because it seems like you guys are a bit behind. So here we go. Hi, everyone. My name is Tyler, and this talk is simplifying testing of REST APIs using PowerShell and AutoRest. It's quite a long title. I feel like there's so many buzzwords, and I feel like I need to include like on the blockchain to this title because it's just so buzzwordy. But this is not a blockchain talk. Don't get your hopes up. But let's go ahead and get started. So let's see how these slides work on my computer. That's trying ever so hard. So the reason for this talk, the reason why I gave it in the first place was that I saw this new thing called AutoRest come out, and I saw it and I was like, this is really cool, and I had to play around with it because I had this like invested interest in it. And so this talk is not necessarily going to give you everything you need to be a master at working with AutoRest, but my hope is that some of the examples that I'll show will help spark interest for you to take this technology and go and try to apply it in your daily lives. All right, so like I said, my name is Tyler. I am a software engineer at Microsoft. I work on the PowerShell team. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can. It's at Tyler Leonhardt, my name. And also, if you want to follow me on Twitch, I do a bunch of live streaming, live coding, both on PowerShell itself and also a bunch of PowerShell related projects as well. So definitely check that out if you're interested. And if you have any questions about live streaming, feel free to ask me after, and I'm happy to talk about it. I'm streaming from sunny Seattle this evening, which is of course a joke because it was rainy and gray out. But yeah, I really wanted to make it down to Portland, but unfortunately, I just got back from Europe because of PowerShell Conference Europe, EU, and my girlfriend's out of town, and I have the dog, and it's a whole thing. But I definitely want to make it down to Portland one day to give a talk at the meetup in person, because I think it's much more fun in person for sure. So let's go ahead and get started with the actual talk. The introduction is over. So the goal of this talk, at the very, very core of it, is we're going to take some YAML and we're going to turn it into some PowerShell script. And as another example, we're going to turn some YAML into some JavaScript. So that's basically at the root what AutoRest is going to do for us. But there's some important terms I want to define before we go any further. The first thing I want to talk about is what's called the OpenAPI spec. You might have heard something called Swagger. This is what it was formerly called, but Swagger was the 2.0 of this technology, and then OpenAPI is the 3.0 of this technology. So what OpenAPI spec is a specification, as the name implies, of your REST API. This defines stuff like all of your routes, and also every input to the route, every output of the route, and all of that fun stuff. Really, at the end of the day, it's just YAML or JSON, your pick, whichever you prefer. It sounds scary, this like specification, but it's really quite simple. So let's go ahead and look at an example. So OpenAPI.yaml, here's an example of one. This is typically a part of the talk where I will point up at the screen behind me and we run through every line, but I'm gonna try to do my best to do this remotely. So feel free to follow along. So up at the top, we've got OpenAPI 3.0.1. Like I said, Swagger was 2, OpenAPI is 3. So that's what that's for. And then we have the info, which just gives like generic information about your REST API. So in this example, it comes from this little REST API that I made a long time ago called the mountain. And what it does is it will tell you whether Mount Rainier is visible from the Space Needle. And it does this by taking some images from the Space Needle and running it through some cognitive services to detect whether or not there's a mountain in the picture. It's all quite overly complicated for what it is, but it was fun to make. And so I figured it was a perfect example because it only has one endpoint, a perfect example to run through for this hello world, so to speak, of this example. So information, title, description, version, pretty self-explanatory. The title of your REST API, what it does, and then what version of the spec. After that, you have servers, and this is typically just like what are the like full URLs of the beginning of the REST API, and what it's going to do is when you define your paths, it's going to tack on those paths to the end of whatever this URL is. So that's like the base URL that your paths will work off of. And then underneath that, we have paths. And this is really the most important part of the spec, where you get to define all of your different routes and their inputs and outputs. Now, for this example, there's just a single GET request, which we see under /API. And for the GET request, we have a summary of what it does, gets whether the mountain is out, an operation ID, and we'll come back to that. That one's actually very important, the operation ID. And then we define the responses. This is the output, and it says for a 200 request, the description is just okay, and the content for this is going to be JSON. And then below that, we see you can define the schema, and this is important, defining the schema of the response that comes back. And here I'm using a reference to this other section of the YAML down below under components. And we see that we're referencing the Mount Rainier component, which is a type object, and it has two properties in it, result and image. Result being a Boolean of whether or not the mountain is out, and then type being the image URL of the image that the cognitive services used to determine whether or not there was a mountain in the picture. So thanks for hanging tight through that. You're probably wondering why Why would you do that? Why would anyone do that? And that's a very valid point. Writing a bunch of YAML is typically not how I want to spend a Saturday, but hey, there is a really solid reason for why you would do that, and it's tooling. By writing this one little YAML file or JSON, you actually get an immense amount of tooling that's available to you from a bunch of people that have kind of like adopted this OpenAPI standard. One of my favorite pieces of tooling that is out there is something they call Swagger UI. And what this is a it's basically just like an auto-generated web page based off of your Swagger spec that will take that and then create this website that can visually show you all of the routes of your API. So here we have like a pet store, and down below there's like the post request, the put, the get, and all the different routes, including routes that have like parameters in it, like that bottom one that says pet/pet ID. It's a very powerful way to visualize your REST API. But not only that, but it also gives you the ability to try out your REST API by allowing you to put in values for parameters, whether they're query parameters or value for the body if it was a post request, something along those lines. And you can actually like execute that request and get back the result that you would expect from your server. So it's actually a really cool way to not only visualize your the way your REST API is set up, but also like do some like small tests all through this GUI. So this would be really helpful for giving to someone who might not be that savvy when it comes to of invoking a web request in like PowerShell or something like that. This is a really fun way as like a really good entry point into testing your REST API. Sorry, my dog. So then the next awesome piece of tooling, which is the highlight of this talk, is something called AutoRest. And what AutoRest is, as we mentioned before, is it's a way to essentially wrap or generate some code that will interact with your REST API. And so what's nice about that is that, so you take this OpenAPI spec, and then it will auto-generate code, auto-generate libraries in any language that you care to support. So what this is really good for in a couple cases is, let's say you have a REST API and then you want to allow your team, your other team, to like interact with your REST API in their C# app or something like that. You can use AutoRest to generate the library in C# as a like nupkeg or something, and then you give that to the other team, and they can then interact with your API as if it was just a bunch of native C# objects, rather than having to wrestle with Newtonsoft.json or something. They get the interaction of an actual like native experience. And then something that happened semi-recently is that the Autorest team recently came out with a PowerShell generator. And what this will do is it will take your OpenAPI YAML spec, and then it'll auto-generate a PowerShell module that can do that can interact with your REST API. And so basically, from a user perspective, it looks like you're just typing a bunch of PowerShell commands, but really you're behind the scenes, invoking a bunch of web requests to your REST API. So you get that like native PowerShell-y feel without having to like, craft a bunch of like crazy, craft a bunch of headers or craft a bunch of like URLs and then send them through like invoke web request or something like that. So it really gives you a nice native feel in that sense. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into the demos that I have for you today. All right, so I hear myself on the TV in your place. So now I can actually see the, oh, well, I guess the camera's not facing the crowd, but hi everyone. So I wrote this, so let's go back to the Mount Rainier OpenAPI spec. Let me switch to a light theme for all of you. All right, so here's that same OpenAPI spec that we saw in the slides. We've got our OpenAPI here. I did change the minor version, or sorry, the patch version of the OpenAPI spec, but that's it. I promise. That's the only change. So what we're going to do is we're going to run this through AutoRest and generate a PowerShell module. So to do that, all we have to do is first get the AutoRest executable. So AutoRest itself is a Node.js. It's a Node.js executable, I guess. And in order to install it, you have to first install Node and its packager and its package manager npm. So if you don't have that, you can either install it with Chocolatey or go grab it from the website. Go grab Node.js. Once you go and get that, then you can do npm install -g to install it globally, AutoRest, and then you want to get the beta version because the PowerShell generator is still in beta, and do this. I've already run it, so I'm not going to go ahead and run it again, but this is the command that you would do to get started. So I am in a directory that has that YAML file right here, right here. Actually, I should show you while we're looking at this example. I also wrote this in the JSON version, so you could see what it looks like. It looks identical as you would expect. The properties are still the same. The only thing that I didn't like about the JSON version is that you end up getting like a whole bunch of these because of the curly braces, and I found that to be kind of ugly in my opinion. Whereas YAML just looked a little bit more clean. So I mean, whatever you're more comfortable with, it doesn't really matter, but I prefer the YAML. So the YAML is here. All I did was installed AutoRest, and the only thing that I need to do next is run my AutoRest command, which is going to be AutoRest Mount Rainier. My back search failed me. I know it's here somewhere. Excuse me while I go and look through my history here. There it is. Okay. Cool. So I don't have any folders. So this might be tough to read because of this gray color. I hope you can read that. Here, I'll copy this into VS Code, and we'll look at the command together. As you can see, I'm using the new Windows terminal. It's very nice. I'm quite pleased with it, actually. So the command is AutoRest. Our input file is going to be that Mount Rainier YAML file. Our output folder is just going to be Mount Rainier. And then we specify -- PowerShell. And that's it. I haven't done any sort of like configuration for AutoRest. All I did was install it. And so I'm going to go ahead and run this command. Take a sip of beer. It might it's going to install a couple modules in order to do the code generation. But I had run this earlier today, so the modules were probably already installed. Take one more sip of beer. I'm sure the slowness of this is likely due to me streaming this talk as well. So my apologies. I should ask my manager for a faster machine. Installing. So while this is running, how is everybody doing? I'm doing well. I'm patiently waiting for this to finish. I think at some point I might have maybe for Q&A, if people want to put like their questions in chat, then I can like just keep answering them in order. Yeah, this installation is much faster when I'm not streaming. And when you run it, it'll be much faster than this. But yeah, it's it's definitely due to the stream that this is much slower than expected. Sorry. Operation not permitted. Weird. Let me just delete the file. I'm just gonna remove the folder and run it again. I think I just like was in a bad state. Sorry about this. Okay, no more files. All right, running it again. This time it won't have to install anything, so it'll be much faster. So while we're waiting again for this, I don't know if, I think my mic kind of, I don't know, died a little bit for a minute there, but I don't know if you heard my suggestion of having people put their questions in the chat and then I can like read from that. That way the delay doesn't affect us too much. But while we're waiting for this as well, there were a couple of really good talks at both PowerShell Summit and PowerShell Conf EU on AutoRest and PowerShell, and you can check out the videos of those. The PowerShell Summit one should be up, but the PowerShell Conference EU one I don't think is up yet, but it will be. So it finished. Excellent. So let's go ahead and dig into the module that was generated. So all right. So let's take a look at what we have in here. So I'm actually really impressed with the amount of pieces that are generated from this. We see here that we have like just a whole bunch of stuff. The most important thing I think is we've got these PS1s, like this test module 1, run module, pack module, and build module. And these are basically your entry points in interacting with the module from a developer standpoint. So once I am in this directory, I can run the build module script, and that will build the module because the module that is generated is a C# / binary module. So it's going to build the C# projects, and it'll like compile them and build them and into a DLL, and then you will be able to import that into a PowerShell session and run the commands from it. So it's building it, and while we're waiting for that, let's just go back to the code. So that's an important file. You also notice that there is a whole bunch of other folders as well. So the generated one, this is like the actual C# code that was generated for this, as the name implies. So if we open up like module.cs, for example, we see we get like a whole bunch of stuff here. Now the goal is that you should never have to touch any of the generated stuff, because even when your REST API changes, you just update the spec and then rerun AutoRest to auto-generate your stuff. That's the intent. So we see, so going back to the terminal, we see that it was built to run this module in an isolated PowerShell session, run the run module PS1, or provide the run parameter. So let's just run the run module PS1. And they do something that's pretty interesting. They actually create an isolated process that has this module imported in it, so that it's easier to test, because once you import a binary module, it can't be removed because it's an actual assembly. But all that aside, at this point, I have the ability to interact with my module. So I can see what commands are available. Git command module and mount Rainier. And we see that I have the one command, which makes sense because my YAML only specified one route. So get mount Rainier. So I can go ahead and run the get mount Rainier commandlet, and we see that I get back a result that says false, the mountain is not out, and then the image that it looked at. So we can like pop this in a browser, for example, and see there is no mountain there. Also, the image is not in the direction of the mountain, which is odd. I'll have to look into that one, but you get the idea. So that is just a hello world example, but you see the power in this, in that like all I had to do was write that single YAML file, and I ended up getting this module with a commandlet in a very PowerShell-y way, get mount Rainier. And I get back the result from my REST API as a hash table, or actually, I think it's as an actual special type. If we look at the type, we see the type name is mount Rainier, which is really, really cool. So it's not just like a hash table or a PS custom object. It's a real type that gets generated as a part of the code generation of Autorest. So let's go back to the code that was generated and see what else we have to work with. So let's see. So we got a custom PSM1. This is pretty interesting. It allows you to add additional PowerShell commands, PowerShell commandlets that you can then that will, I guess, automatically be exported. I guess the idea here is that if what gets generated isn't like the perfect user experience, you could then add helper commands to this file, and then that will like give your users a much nicer experience. So that's kind of cool. They also have docs, a docs folder, which under the README is, we see that this directory contains the documentation of commandlets for mount Rainier module. To run the documentation generation, use the generate help .ps1, which is really cool. So let's go ahead and run that. Generate help. And what this is going to do is it's actually going to leverage Platypus and generate the markdown documents for all of this stuff. So we see the like really the normal like PowerShell doc format here that we would expect to see. So we get docs generation out of the box, which is awesome. Examples, so you can add your own examples to your usages of your module here, and I believe they end up like, I think they end up in in the docs somehow. They get used there for something, but that's really cool. Resources for types, and then also tests. This is really cool because there's this test directory, and if you add any sort of like pester tests to this, it will, the tooling is there for like running pester tests against your generated code. So what that means is I could have like a Mount Rainier .tests.ps1, have my describe block, and then do get Mount Rainier and then maybe do like dot, what was it? Result is the response. Result should be false. And so then if we go back to our console here, I'm just going to exit this this instance of PowerShell where we were testing it out. We can actually run the test module, I believe it's called, test module script, which is going to do the same thing of creating that other process and then execute the pester test. It actually will install it if it's not actually installed. Actually, that might just install it to a local location anyway, but yeah, that's not too important. So this is going to install pester, and then it'll run that that pester test that I wrote. So because my computer is being very slow at the moment, I'm going to switch over to the code and keep going through that. But we'll come back to look at this and see the pester test results. So I think the rest is actually pretty self-explanatory. There's a how-to.markdown that tells you all of the details about how to use the generated stuff. And then it also gives you a README that you would fill out for your module that was auto-generated. So it just goes to show that there's just like a ton of, oh, this is interesting. Microsoft Azure PowerShell. Yeah, I wonder what this is all about. But anyway, you can see that just like there's so much stuff that gets generated for you, and it actually does a really good job at providing you with all the tooling that you need to auto-generate and write a very nice PowerShell module for interacting with your REST API. And here we see that we have the single test pass, which is really cool. So all of this is available to you. I mean, I didn't configure AutoRest. I just installed it and ran it against my YAML, and I got all of this. So it's honestly, I'm super impressed with the work that's been put into this and the results so far, and I'm excited to see where it goes further. So this is all fine and dandy, this example here, but it's also very, very simple though, right? It's not very complex. So I thought, all right, I'm gonna really test out this piece of software, AutoRest. I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna find a random Swagger spec, random OpenAPI spec, and I'm gonna just run it through AutoRest and see what happens. Okay. And that's basically what I did. So I found, I'll show you the API. I found this API from the FDIC. That's the Bank Developer API, or sorry, Bank Data API. And what this is it exposes a few different endpoints that mainly give you information about different institutions across the US, like banks and stuff, right? So I was like, this seems like a really good candidate. I wonder if they have an OpenAPI spec. And sure enough, I found this full OpenAPI specification for the API. And to prove that they actually have one, I scrolled down a little bit, and sure enough, I found that Swagger UI that I showed before. And we can like go ahead and mess around with it if we wanted to, just like that. So that was really cool that they offered that right at the get-go for me to like test out before I even got too deep into their API. So I found this spec, and you can see that it's quite long, but it's actually much longer than this because it references, where does it reference it? It's in here somewhere. YAML. Yeah, it references 4 other pieces, 4 other YAML files. And actually, if I like go into them, they're pretty nuts. Like this one is even longer than the last one. So what I did is, for simplicity, I like threw it all together into one YAML file so you could see the sheer size of it. Let me go ahead and open that up. Let's do this. Here it is. fdic.yaml. It's this long. It's very, very long. It contains a bunch of information. And so I'm like, all right, let's go ahead and try it. Let's run it through AutoRest and see what happens. So first things first, when I gave this talk at a meetup in Seattle, I started with generating some JavaScript. So I'm going to start with that, just to prove to you that this is like a multi-language tool. Now, one thing I found out today, and I've talked to Garrett about this, who is the primary developer on the Autorest PowerShell stuff, is I found a difference in behavior when I include a slash here and when I don't include a slash here. And he says he's already working on a fix for it. But for the JavaScript one I'm about to generate, I need there to not be a slash there. But then after, I will generate a PowerShell module for this, and then I will need the slash there. So make sure I remember to put it back in. So all right, so the command for this so that you all can see is this. It's basically identical to the command we ran before, except I'm specifying node here instead of PowerShell. So let's go ahead and run that. And that may or may not have to install the JavaScript one. Let's see. It looks like it's already installed. Great. So that's going to be much faster. 14 seconds it took to generate the node module for that one. So in here, I'll have a FDIC folder. Wait, did I run it against? Oh shoot! I ran it against Mount Rainier. Sorry about that. Let me do this correctly. There we go. Take 2. I was going to say it was pretty fast. This will take a bit longer because it's a much more complicated YAML file. But I'll tell you one thing: it takes a lot shorter than you writing all the code that gets generated. 21 seconds. All right, let's take a look at what was generated in the FDIC folder. I just realized that when I pasted and we talked about this, it literally said Mount Rainier here. Gosh, it's so in the zone. This should say FDIC, and this should say FDIC. Anyway, so I've opened this up, and this is testament to the PowerShell generator. This is actually all you get in when you generate a node package. You get a package.json, which is the metadata file for the module, and then here you get the JavaScript, and then here you get the types if you want to use TypeScript. And then there's a whole bunch of other JavaScript stuff that gets generated. So how you would take advantage of this, I'll show you how things just kind of work with this. We'll create a foo.ts. I'm going to make a TypeScript file real quick. And I'm going to import the module that was generated. So this FDIC bank data API beta. And I'm going to import the this FDIC bank data API beta. Don't worry about this if you're not too familiar with the JavaScript syntax. I'm going to show the PowerShell example in a bit, but I think it's important to kind of get just to see that this does in fact work. All right. So what we do is we make a new object here, and I will set it to FDIC equals this new FDIC bank data API beta object. And then from here, FDIC, and I hit dot, I get completions. I get IntelliSense with all of the details of every single one of the actions that I can take. So, for example, let's go ahead and search institutions, which will search for banks in any state that you care about. And you see here, I get a whole bunch of like awesome IntelliSense. So the first thing is options when you search. So for a so the thing I'll put here is filter, and we'll say filter for only the state of Oregon. And so if we go back to the FDIC docs here, they say this is the filter syntax. So that's one thing that we still need to follow, but we can go ahead and do STALP, which just says, it just means like the state, and it's OR for Oregon, right? I'm pretty sure. So STALP, this is their weird query syntax, but we put that there. And then we could say fields, fields is we just care about the name of the institution. And then if you're not too familiar with JavaScript in general, then ignore this next part. All I'm going to do is take the result of that call, and I'm going to print it out. And the way we print out things in JavaScript is we use console.log. Like this. Cool. All this is going to do is run this function, and then we'll take the result, and then we'll log it. This is a very like TypeScripty, JavaScripty way of writing code. And so then, if we run, since we wrote it in TypeScript, first we have to compile it. Where is it? I think it's, wait. It's under FDIC, and then it's foo, right? Yes. So first we install all of our dependencies, npm install. Oh boy. Sit back, relax, grab another beer. That's right. Earlier today, I did this on a bus, and that was a huge mistake. It never finished. I had to get off the bus before my install finished, but I think we'll have better luck. My apartment Wi-Fi is pretty solid. Cool, done. And then we actually can just compile it at this point. So let me take that foo.ts. TSC is the TypeScript compiler. And this is just going to compile the TypeScript into JavaScript. We can safely ignore these errors. If you're really curious about them, I can tell you why they're there. But then I will use Node to run the foo.js file that got generated. And we get a 404 not found. Geez, that wasn't expected. Probably because I know exactly why this happened, because remember how I told you one needed a slash and one didn't? I had it wrong. One needs the slash, the other one doesn't. Let me try this one more time. With the slash. Man, the demo gods aren't too happy with me today, are they? Let me copy my generated, or my sample code here. All right, one more time. I can't remember if I added a slash or not. Oh boy. Okay, awesome. So it's doing its thing. All right. Open up that folder. npm install yet again. Oops, forgot to cd into the directory. This actually might have happened because I reported this issue with the slash, and someone might have fixed it in that window of me reporting it and giving this demo. It's possible. It's a hunch. Okay. Let's do this. Yes. All right. And foo.js. Still 404 not found. That's not a good sign. All right. Well, I could tell you it worked earlier, so I'm going to switch on over to the PowerShell example, and we're going to do that instead. Sorry about that. That worked literally under an hour ago. All right, so same thing, except instead of running AutoRest with Node.js, I'm going to run AutoRest with PowerShell like I did before. And I'm going to be very sad if this doesn't work. Just make sure I didn't accidentally typo something, but this looks fine. Yeah, it could be, but I think what I was getting was a 404 not found. But yeah, maybe. All right, so all of that generated it threw some warnings, but those aren't too important. We still get all of our good stuff that we generated. So I'm going to build the module and then provide the -run parameter, which will then run it after it's built. All right. So let's see what commands we get. So we get 4 commands from the FDIC Bank Data API. Get failure, get historical, search structure institution, and search structure location. So search structure institution gives us a, here, let's do it this way, menu complete, which looks a little weird in the new terminal, but we want filters. So let's give filters the STALP. Wow, the menu complete made that look really bad. Let me try on a new line here. Okay, search structure institution, filters, okay. STALP OR, and then fields, we'll do name like this. Okay, oh God, thank goodness. We got some data back. So let me store this in a variable so we can dig into it. So by default, we get this object that isn't really all that pretty, and this like is probably some feedback back to the AutoRest team. But if I do foo.data here, we see I get a whole bunch of these institution data objects, which probably need to be formatted properly. That said, I can still drill into these and get like, let me see here. Which type are these? I think I have to dig deeper and do like data. Right, and then from here, there is data here. I know there is because we get a whole bunch of stuff here. I think, what if I do like get type? Let's see what type it is. It's institution array. So remember to JSON data. Okay. Pipe to get member gives us a whole bunch of stuff. We want the name because that's the only field that we specified. So if we do this, we end up getting the names of the institutions. Maybe you guys know some of these places. I don't know these banks, but but yes. So we can see that it works. Surprisingly. This is some arbitrary Swagger spec that I found online that had no intention of generating their code using AutoRest, because AutoRest wasn't even a figment of people's imaginations. But then, just like that, AutoRest manages to do, at least for the most part, the right things, and you're able to like get the data behind this API in a very like PowerShell-y way. Rather than having to do a bunch of like invoke web requests or invoke REST methods in order to like get this kind of data back. So it's pretty impressive. I was actually shocked to see that it just worked like this. Yeah, I was very impressed. Is that cool? Do you guys like that? Is that interesting? So I'm going to go ahead and go back to these slides, and we'll kind of wrap this up a bit. So that was both the Hello World Mount Rainier demo and also a demo where I just grabbed an arbitrary OpenAPI spec and funneled it through this thing. Caveats. Well, I think you saw an example of one of these, but I will say that the PowerShell generator is still in beta. So if you do experience any issues, like I experienced with that slash issue that I found, absolutely open issues on their GitHub repo, which we'll see in the next slide. It's really important. This is that leads me to the second caveat, which is code generation is really, really hard. So one, it might not always do the right thing. For example, the FDIC example wasn't quite perfect. It would be nice if it was like maybe a little bit more PowerShell-y. So be sure that you test your output to be what you expect it to be. It is very, very hard, but it's also really impressive to see that something can be achievable like this. And also, AutoRest can only do so much. Be as verbose in your OpenAPI specs as possible. Now, before, I'm just going to go back here. Before, I mentioned the operation ID being a very important indicator, this guy. This is what AutoRest uses to generate all of the like PowerShell commandlets and method names and all that stuff. That's why when we saw the generated commandlet, it was get Mount Rainier, because this operation ID is Mount Rainier _ get. It does some like fancy magic to like guess what your intent was based on this operation ID to be the commandlet that gets generated out of this. And if we look at the FDIC YAML one, we'll see very similar things. So this is institutions. The operation ID is search institutions, and search is the verb that ends up getting used for that. So yeah, operation ID, very important. Be verbose. So then the last slide I have is the links, the big link slide. So feel free to take a picture of this or refer to this later or whatever the case may be. This has both all the code that I used for this demo. It also includes the PowerShell. When I originally gave this talk, it was to people who didn't know what PowerShell was. So I had some slides that I obviously didn't mention in this talk, but some slides on what PowerShell was. but also all the AutoRest links and stuff on the OpenAPI initiative and cool Swagger / OpenAPI tools. So definitely go and check those out. Someone, that very last link, someone managed to get some C# Azure functions working with OpenAPI, where all you have to do is write the code and then it will auto-generate the YAML, which you can then use to auto-generate more code. It's like, how many layers can we auto-generate before we're just like auto-generating the actual REST API? But that was, I thought, really cool. So I think someone in the PowerShell community, I think it's Doug Fink, has started like kind of fiddling with this idea of potentially auto-generating the Swagger UI based on the response of a REST API. And he was doing that with the PowerShell support in Azure Functions. And so that way it's just like PowerShell all the way down, which is really cool. But yeah, so a whole bunch of really cool links. So that's pretty much the end of my talk. I hope that like you found this interesting and cool. I find it pretty fascinating that we've managed to get to a point where we're able to generate code off of these REST APIs. And yeah, I hope that you'll be able to take this knowledge to your organization or whatever and have fun with it. So yeah, that's all I have to say. I'll wait for the delay to catch up, and we'll go from there. So the question was, the question that I just got was, what would AutoRest do if the operation ID uses an unapproved verb? And it's a good question. Why don't we go ahead and try it and see what happens? I'm pretty sure what it does is it just tacks on maybe like invoke or something to it. So for example, let me just put like, I don't know, Mount Rainier and then like throw. Obviously not an approved verb. Let me delete this. Mount Rainier. Ooh. Goodbye. Okay. Auto generate. Go ahead. All right, let's see what happens. I am also very curious. Let's just see what happens. All right, generation complete. Not FDIC, not Rainier. Rainier, build a PS1, run. It wasn't search institutions. It is Mount Rainier. Survey says invoke throw Mount Rainier. So yeah, that's actually pretty PowerShell-y, to take something like that operation ID and to tack on invoke, at least like given that information. That is a good question. I can't say that I've dealt with a spec that does something like that, but oh yeah, sorry about that. So the question was, how good does the generator deal with commands that are composable on the pipeline? So something that might get generated would be like get Mount Rainier piped to, remove Mount Rainier, something like that, right? And the answer to that question is I honestly haven't tried it myself personally, so I can't really give an answer. However, I think if in your spec, let's see here. In your spec, you could potentially use the same reference to the component. You could reference the component in both your getter and your remove, for example, and it might work like you would expect, but I haven't tried it personally.
Awesome. I think that's all the questions that we had locally. Unless you had some closers, I would go ahead and just move it to. I'll just go ahead and close up the stream for the day.
All right. Well, if there are any other questions about really anything, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or whatever the case may be. I'm always happy to talk PowerShell. I guess I'm a bit biased in that front, but hey, it's a pretty cool thing, I have to admit. but yeah, thank you all so much for joining. I hope you found you got something useful out of this, or you sparked some amount of interest in taking this and seeing what you can do with it. And I hope you all have the fantastic rest of your day. And I promise that next time I will show up in person. All right. Thank you all.
All right. Thanks a lot. And you can just go ahead and relax, and I'll close up the stream locally. Thanks a lot.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right. So thanks for everybody for coming physically, if you're able to make it. Thanks very much to Tyler for the great presentation. Thanks as always to our sponsors, to Viewpoint and Sapien for providing the venue and the food. I found that to be a really exciting presentation. I mean, that was a really impressively full-featured module that thing generates. I mean, it's really great. So what we're going to do is we're going to close down the stream. We're going to do a little bit of in-person networking and chat. And thanks, everybody, for viewing and for coming. See you next time.